I have been hiking since I was a child. My father took me on my first trail when I was 7 years old, and I never stopped. By the time I was in my late 20s, I had completed over 40 trails across 6 different states. I knew what I was doing. I respected the outdoors. I followed the rules. I tell you this because I need you to understand that what happened to me was not the result of inexperience or carelessness. I had done everything right. It was early October, peak season for the trail I had chosen, a well-documented 14-mile loop through a national forest in the Pacific Northwest. I had the map downloaded offline. I had my gear packed 3 days in advance. I told 2 separate people my exact route and my expected return time. I had done this trail twice before without incident. I set off at 6 in the morning under a clear sky. The first 8 miles were perfect. Cool air, good visibility, the kind of morning that makes you remember why you started hiking in the first place. I stopped at the halfway shelter to eat and check my map and noted I was slightly ahead of schedule. That was when I noticed the trail. It branched off to the left about 30 feet ahead of the shelter, narrow, barely wide enough for one person, cutting into the trees at a slight downward angle. There was no marker, no blaze on the trees, nothing on my downloaded map. I walked over and looked at it. It was clearly used. The ground was packed down the way trails get when feet have been traveling the same path for years. The edges were defined. This wasn't an animal track. Someone had been walking this route regularly enough to carve it into the earth. I stood there for a long time, looking at it. Every instinct I had said to leave it alone. I had a route, I had a schedule, I had people expecting me back at a specific time. I took the trail. I told myself I would follow it for 5 minutes and turn back if it didn't connect to anything on my map. 5 minutes became 10. 10 became 20. The trail kept going, winding gently downward through increasingly dense tree cover, the light fading as the canopy thickened above me. I checked my GPS. The signal was weak but still present. I noted my position and kept going. That was when I heard the first sound. A branch snap, sharp and deliberate, somewhere behind me and to the left. The kind of snap that doesn't come from an animal moving through undergrowth. It comes from something placing its weight carelessly, something large. I stopped and turned around. The trail behind me was empty as far back as I could see. I told myself it was a deer, maybe an elk. The forest was full of both. I kept walking. The second sound came 10 minutes later, same direction, slightly closer. I stopped again, stood completely still and listened. The forest was silent in a way it hadn't been before. No birds, no wind in the branches, nothing. That particular silence, the absence of every natural sound, is something experienced hikers learn to recognize immediately. It means the animals went quiet. It means something changed in the environment around you. Something that made every creature in the vicinity decide to stop moving and stop making noise. I turned around and started walking back the way I came. The third sound came immediately. Not behind me this time, ahead of me. Something was now between me and the main trail. I stopped walking. My mind was running through options. Step off the trail into the trees and move parallel to it. Find high ground, make noise. Some animals are deterred by noise. Then I heard the fourth sound, and every rational thought I had disappeared entirely. It was a voice. Not words, not language, just a low, sustained sound coming from somewhere in the trees to my right. The kind of sound a person makes when they are trying to locate something by listening for a response. Like a call, waiting for an answer. I did not answer. I left the trail entirely and moved through the trees as fast as I could without running. Running disorients you, costs you energy, and makes noise you cannot control. I navigated by GPS alone, cutting directly toward the main trail's coordinates without following any path. I hit the main trail 11 minutes later, and I did not stop moving until I reached the trailhead parking lot. I filed a report with the park rangers the following morning and described the unmarked trail and the sounds I heard. The ranger I spoke to listened to everything without much expression. When I finished, he asked me to show him on the map exactly where the branch-off point was. I pointed to the location. He looked at it for a moment. Then he told me that 3 years earlier, a hiker had gone missing in that section of the forest. They had followed an unmarked trail that didn't appear on any official map. An extensive search had been conducted. The hiker was never found. He told me the search team had found a campsite deep in the trees, about half a mile off the main trail. It showed signs of long-term habitation, not camping, living. Whoever had been using that campsite had been there for a very long time. He told me they never identified who it belonged to. I have not hiked alone since that day, and I've never taken a trail that wasn't on the map. This is a story told by two people, myself and my partner Raina. We have compared our memories of this many times over the years since it happened, and our accounts are identical in every detail. I want to make that clear before I begin because what I'm about to describe sounds like something we invented. We did not invent it. It was a summer weekend trip. A 2-day out and back trail in a mountain range we had visited several times before. Moderate difficulty, well marked, popular enough that you would typically pass other hikers every hour or so. We set off on the Saturday morning with enough gear for one overnight camp at the designated site near the summit. We saw him for the first time about 2 miles in. A man hiking alone, maybe a quarter mile ahead of us on the trail. Average build, dark jacket, a standard hiking pack. Nothing remarkable about him. We noted him the way you note any other hiker, a brief acknowledgement and nothing more. An hour later we stopped to rest and eat at a flat rock overlooking a valley. When we set off again, the man in the dark jacket was still ahead of us. Same distance, roughly a quarter mile. Raina mentioned it first. She said it was strange that our pace hadn't changed the gap at all. We had been moving at a good speed. He should have either pulled ahead or fallen behind. Instead, the distance between us had remained almost perfectly constant for over an hour. I said it was probably coincidence. We kept walking. At the 3-hour mark, we stopped at a stream crossing to refill our water and check the map. We spent about 20 minutes there. When we set off again, I looked up the trail. The man in the dark jacket was a quarter mile ahead. He hadn't stopped. He hadn't slowed down. He had maintained exactly the same distance between us during the 20 minutes we were stationary at the stream. Neither of us said anything for a while after that. We reached the overnight campsite in the late afternoon. 3 other groups of hikers were already there, 2 couples and a solo woman who had been on the trail since that morning. We set up our tent, made food, sat by the fire with the others. The man in the dark jacket was not at the campsite. We mentioned him to the other hikers, described him. Nobody had seen anyone matching that description on the trail that day. The solo woman had set off before us and said she had been alone on the trail all morning. We told ourselves. I want to start by saying I'm not someone who scares easily. I spent 4 years in the military. I have been in situations that would make most people's worst nightmares seem mild. I'm not telling this story because I'm traumatized by it. I'm telling it because I have never been able to explain it, and that bothers me more than the fear did. It was an autumn solo trip, a remote trail in the Appalachian Range, not a named or particularly well-known route, more of a fire road that had been adopted by hikers over the years. Long, flat sections through dense hardwood forest, broken up by occasional steep drops into creek ravines. I had done it twice before. Good trail, quiet, the kind of place that takes half a day and leaves you feeling like you've been gone a week. I was about 4 miles in when I noticed the smell. If you spend any amount of time in the backcountry, you learn the smells: leaf litter, creek water, pine resin, animal musk, the particular damp smell that comes up from the ground after rain. You learn them so well they stop registering consciously. This smell registered. It was wrong in a way I could not immediately identify. Not decay, not the sharp sweetness of something dead. Something else, chemical almost, like the air around it had a different composition than the air around me. It was coming from the ravine to my left. I stopped at the edge of the drop and looked down, maybe 30 feet of steep slope to a shallow creek at the bottom. Dense undergrowth on both sides, nothing visible that explained the smell. I kept walking. 20 minutes later, I came to the point in the trail where I would typically cross the ravine on a narrow footbridge and continue on the eastern side of the creek for the remaining miles back to the trailhead. The footbridge was gone. Not damaged, not washed out, gone. The anchor points on both sides of the ravine were still there, old wooden posts set into the ground, but the bridge itself had been removed cleanly, both anchor ropes cut. I stood there and looked at it. I had 2 options: turn back and retrace 4 miles to the trailhead, or find a crossing point further along the ravine and pick up the eastern trail below the bridge. I chose to find a crossing. I followed the ravine edge north for about 10 minutes until I found a section where the creek narrowed enough to step across on the rocks. I made the crossing without difficulty and turned south to pick up the trail. That was when I saw them. Tied to a tree about 15 feet from the creek bank, a pair of hiking boots, laces knotted together, hanging from a low branch at roughly eye level. Men's boots well worn, mud caked on the soles. A hiking pole leaned against the trunk below them. A small backpack on the ground at the base of the tree, unzipped. I stood there for a long time looking at this. A person had been here. They had removed their boots. They had left their pack. And they were gone. I called out once, then twice. My voice went into the trees and came back as nothing. I checked the backpack. Inside was a water bottle, a trail map, a set of car keys, and a phone. The phone was off. I tried to power it on. Dead battery. I looked at the trail map. It was the same trail I was on. A section had been circled in pen, the area immediately around the footbridge. I picked up my pace and did not stop moving until I reached the trailhead. I reported everything to the ranger station the same evening. They sent a team out the following morning. They found the boots, the pack, the phone, the car keys. They found the car in the trailhead parking lot. It had been there for 11 days. They searched the ravine for 4 days. Divers went into the deeper sections of the creek. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no sign of the person those boots belonged to. The ranger I spoke to at the end of the search told me the bridge removal was the part they couldn't account for. Someone had cut those ropes deliberately. The bridge hadn't fallen. It had been taken down intentionally. They never found out who. They never found the hiker. And I have never been able to stop thinking about that smell. Whatever it was there before I found the boots, before I found the bridge. It was there at the beginning of the ravine, 4 miles in, when everything still looked normal. Something in that ravine had already changed by the time I arrived. I just didn't know what I was walking toward yet. 3 trails, 3 people who walked into the woods expecting to come back the same way they went in. 2 of them did. 1 of them didn't come back at all. The woods have been here longer than we have. They were here before the trails, before the maps, before the names we gave to the peaks and the rivers and the paths between the trees. Whatever lives in them has been there just as long. And it has never needed a trail to find you. If something happened to you out there, something you've never been able to explain, something you've told yourself was just the woods playing tricks, send it to us. The email is in the description below. I'm Hollow Dark. Subscribe. New horror every week. And the next time you step off a trail because something looks interesting, remember that unmarked paths exist for a reason. And the reason is never a good one.